Good evening. My name is Michelle McGlone. I'm the Director of Brookline Adult and Community Education. I want to welcome everybody to EVs for the EV Curious. We're very, very fortunate to bring together a wonderful panel of very well-informed people who are going to be able to answer some of our questions about electric vehicles and what the future brings, because it's certainly here now. You see more and more electric vehicles out on the road today. This is a two-session seminar, so this is the first night, and then we will meet again next Wednesday evening for the second half of this two-part workshop. And I don't know if any of you have taken classes with Brookline Adult Ed in the past. Just so you know, very briefly, we are one of the oldest non-credit public education programs in the country. We have been around since 1832. Wow. So it's really a proud tradition. We're trying very hard to continue to sustain programming and really appreciate all of the support of people in the community like yourselves who join us for sessions like this in our classes. Without further ado, I just want to take a moment to introduce Ralph Child. Ralph is a resident of Brookline who approached me and said, Michelle, I have a great idea. I think there's going to be people in the community that would be interested in this. What do you think? And here we are today as a result of his ideas and his passion. He is a retired attorney who specialized in energy and environmental law and policy. So he's got a great background and a lot of contacts in this area and was instrumental in bringing our guest speakers together this evening. So I'd like to turn this over to you, Ralph, and we'll begin our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and for not only accepting the idea, but working really hard to put it together. I really do appreciate it. And yes, I'm Ralph Child, a retired attorney, and I do not own an electric vehicle, but I am personally EV curious because, like a lot of people, I think, I believe that my next car should be an electric vehicle. I currently own a now 11-year-old Prius, which has got probably at least a few more years of life in it. So it's not imminent unless I get so curious that I can't wait any longer. But I think there are a lot of people that believe that about their own use of cars and are sort of, want to figure out when's the right time, how will I charge it, all those sorts of things. So once the idea is accepted, I needed to go find someone that actually knows what they're talking about to present materials. And that pretty quickly led me to conclude that the Green Energy Consumers Alliance here in Massachusetts and Rhode Island was not only very, proximate, but also probably the best for what we're talking about, because some years ago, they developed what is called their Drive Green program, which does any number of things, perhaps the most important of which is they have pre-negotiated contracts or contractual arrangements with some of the auto dealers so that people that are interested in buying or leases EVs can go to a sort of ready-made program that has been developed by someone with consumers' interests foremost. The history of Green Energy Consumers Alliance is now, what, 35 years old, Anna? And it started as a collective to buy fuel oil in bulk and then turn it over at lower prices to consumers, which it still does. But in the EV area, they've developed a lot of training materials and so forth that they presented very well. So that's why I contacted them to find out more about it and was able to convince them that this was a good forum for doing it. Anna, who's about to take over the mic, is the director of the Drive Green program. And I think you'll find her quite compelling. So she's going to give a presentation. There will be some intervals in there where she'll take a look at any comments that have been put into the chat and deal with them right away, or perhaps at the end. After her presentation is over, we're going to open up to everybody to have a more general discussion. We have a number of guests that I've brought here tonight who include some Brookline residents who already are driving EVs. I've invited them to comment as they wish, and I may cue them at one point or another to talk a little bit about their own experience. As you see from the headings, we also have Emma staff, parentheses, Representative Vitolo. As many of you know, Representative Tommy Vitolo represents a big chunk of Brookline, and Emma is his current staff person. And she's here mostly to listen, I think, but Emma, as always, please feel free to comment and ask questions and all of that. And then Tom Barrasso is with us. Tom joined the city government, the town government here in Brookline in May. He's the director of sustainability and is working on all sorts of sustainability issues in Brookline, including working to get some of the town's vehicle fleet electrified and so forth. And I invite Tom as well to come and describe that as the evening goes on. So with that, I will very happily turn it over to Anna to take it from here.
Very nice. Thank you, Ralph and Michelle. I will do my best to be compelling. You let me know if I'm not compelling enough, and I'll work on changing that. But as Ralph said, my name is Anna. I'm the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers. I'm going to be giving a brief presentation that is broken up into 4 parts. At the beginning, I'll kind of set the scene a little bit with Massachusetts climate policy. Then I'll talk about why electric vehicles are a good choice, both from a societal standpoint and from as a driver standpoint. Then I'll talk about some important things you should know if you're thinking about going electric, which is mostly how does charging work. And then the last section is how to actually get one. So in between each of those sections, I'll have sort of stopping points to go over questions and make sure everybody understood the content in the previous section. And I don't know who among you has an electric car, but when we get to the question and answer part, definitely jump in and answer from your experience if you'd like to, because I think it's really valuable for people to hear from people who actually own an EV. And on that front, I will fully disclose that I do not own an electric car, but that's because I don't own a car. But my parents have a Chevrolet Bolt and have had it for a couple of years, and it is excellent. So I can speak to the driving experience from their perspective, as well as the perspective of all the folks who've gotten electric cars through our program. But with that, I will jump into presentation mode. First, I should probably share my screen. Okay, can you all actually see my screen? Yeah, I see a thumbs up. Great. Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization with a mission to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. And what that means is we run a series of programs and services that help people access clean energy technologies, whether that is electric vehicles or renewable energy or solar or efficiency programs. And then we take the experience that we gain running those programs to inform the advocacy work that we do at the state and local level. Some of you may be familiar with us because we are actually the supplier for Brookline's Green Municipal Aggregation Program. So if you are on the base product there and getting 25% more renewable energy than required by state law, we are the ones who are supplying that. And if you've opted up to 100%, which wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you should, if you can, we're the ones supplying that additional renewable energy with power from wind turbines and solar arrays and low impact hydro in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New England. So some of you might be familiar with us from that. And in the old days, we were called Mass Energy. So if that rings a bell, we're the same organization, just a new name. So as I mentioned, the first part of this presentation will kind of be setting the scene on state climate efforts on transportation. So the first thing that you should know is that transportation is now our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. This is the most recent data. It's from 2017 from the Department of Environmental Protection, but it shows that 42% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. And this has only been growing over the past decades, basically, as vehicles get larger and we use more fuel, as we drive more. This slice of the pie has been increasing, and thanks to laws like our renewable energy portfolio standard, we've actually been adding renewable energy steadily to our electricity mix. So that slice of the pie has been decreasing a little bit. So we're now at the point in Massachusetts, but also nationally, that transportation is the biggest slice and really something we need to tackle if we're serious about our climate goals. And within that 42%, the largest chunk is light duty vehicles. So the vehicles that we're all getting in every day to go to work or get our groceries. We have about 5.5 million of those on the road in Massachusetts, and all of those are contributing to this slice of the pie. Massachusetts now has a goal to be at net zero emissions by 2050. And net zero is basically a complicated term that we can get into, but at the very least, we'll have reduced actual emissions 85% under 1990 levels by 2050. How we're going to get there is something that is being hotly debated and contested all the time. But at the end of the year last year, the state released the 2050 Decarbonization Roadmap, where basically they spent over a year, I think, doing a ton of math and listening to very many people across the state to figure out how we're actually going to reduce our emissions from here to 2050 in the ways that are the most cost effective. And within that roadmap, there was a whole appendix, basically, or technical report dedicated to transportation. That if you would like some light reading, I highly recommend, but it talks about how the state really sees us shrinking that slice of the pie. All of the math and the forecasting that was in this 2050 roadmap informed the 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So Massachusetts has a law on the books called the Global Warming Solutions Act that requires the state reduce emissions under 1990 levels by certain benchmark dates. And on a regular basis, the state has to basically write and issue a report that says, okay, this is the plan for how we're actually going to meet those emissions reductions requirements. So at the end of 2030, right after that roadmap was released, there was the draft 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan released. And in the transportation section, what the state said that in order to meet our emissions reductions goals, which at the time were 45% under 1990 levels by 2030, we need 750,000, yes, that's how math works, to 1 million electric cars on the road by 2030, and no new gas-powered cars being bought in Massachusetts by 2035. So according to the math they did, those are the benchmarks we need to hit. And then they proposed a series of strategies or regulations to actually meet those goals, which were a mix of vehicle standards, incentives, building out infrastructure, all of that. Then very shortly after they released that report, the legislature passed and Governor Baker signed into law the 2021 Roadmap Bill, which sets a more aggressive target for emissions reductions in 2030. So instead of reducing emissions 45%, we now have to reduce them 50%, which is great, but also means that the state is currently in the process of rewriting the Clean Energy and Climate Plan to figure out what we need to do to get those additional 5% of emissions reductions. So the state is working on that right now. They're planning to release a new draft for comment in the spring, but then the final report has to be released by July 1st. So that is sort of the big picture background on what the state is doing right now. But there's two important parallel sort of efforts that I want to call to. One, of course, is the federal infrastructure package. It remains to be seen exactly what will come down the pike for us there. But the proposals, even though they've been slimmed down considerably from President Biden's original proposal, are still massive and will be transformative. So those will be a great help whenever they arrive and will dovetail nicely with the other efforts the state is undertaking. And then finally, I want to make folks aware that our electric utilities know that they have a role to play in this transition, and right now actually have proposals before the Department of Public Utilities about exactly what their role is going to be in electrifying transportation in the next couple of years. If you're interested in that, I can share a blog post summary about what they proposed, but basically they recognize that they need to help build out this infrastructure, and they have a plan. And they also want to help with some of the other pieces, like making sure that when you charge your car matters, and that you get incentivized to charge at times that are cheapest for the whole system. They want to do things with electric buses and car sharing and lots of other stuff. So that is another sort of big source of movement on this front that is worth keeping an eye on if you're interested in all of this. So that is all sort of the big picture context of what's happening in Massachusetts. And I'm going to just transition nicely into why electric vehicles are a good thing, and then stop at the end of this section for questions. So I just spent a lot of time talking about climate. So the first thing to note is that electric vehicles are much, much cleaner than gas-powered cars, even when you take into account how the electricity that fuels them is generated. So this is data from the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have a really great tool called the EV emissions tool. You can look it up, where you can put in any zip code in the country and any vehicle, electric vehicle, and it'll show you what the emissions are per mile based on the electricity mix in that zip code. So based on that tool, the average gas-powered car emits 381 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. A plug-in hybrid, which is a vehicle that has a battery that you can charge by plugging it into an outside source, but also has a backup gas tank. The average plug-in hybrid emits 176 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven when you take into account our electric mix here in Massachusetts. So that right there is a reduction by half. If you take a step further and choose a battery electric vehicle, which is purely electric, no gas tank at all, your emissions go from 381 to 96 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. And that is a 75% drop, which is absolutely huge. The good news here is that those emissions related to driving a battery electric vehicle will only decrease in the coming years, because every year by law, we add more renewable energy to our grid. A gas-powered car is only going to get so much cleaner. That is a technology we've been working on for over 100 years. But battery electric vehicles at this point really can only get cleaner, both because the battery technology is getting better and because we're adding more renewable energy to our grid. And then a final somewhat shameless plug. If you are driving a battery electric vehicle and you charge up in Brookline and you've signed up for the 100% renewable energy product through the aggregation, you're driving on zero emissions, which is really incredible. It's really hard if you want to reduce emissions in other parts of your life to do it by just switching one technology out. But this is a place where you can make a really big difference the next time you're looking to buy a car by choosing something with a plug over a gas-powered car. Along with those climate benefits, there are really important public health benefits that we think it's particularly important to highlight now. Basically, when an electric vehicle is running on the battery, there are no tailpipe emissions. There are tailpipe emissions if you're driving a plug-in hybrid and it's running on gas, but when it's running on electricity, there's no tailpipe emissions. And even if you take into account how that electricity is generated, very similar to reduced greenhouse gas emissions, you've got reduced emissions of the types of things that harm human health. So if you've heard of NOx and SOx emissions, those are lower. Everything that contributes to ground level ozone, which exacerbates lung issues, those are lower. So really, electrifying transportation is a public health strategy. This is also a good point to remember that climate change itself is a public health threat. So as the planet warms, we're seeing more and more disease transmission or health impacts from natural disasters, or lots of things that I could talk about for a very long time. So both directly and indirectly, electrifying transportation is a matter of public health. The American Lung Association has been pretty vocal on this and has released a lot of studies trying to figure out monetarily what the value of those avoided health costs are. And they released a study at the end of 2020, I think, that looked at what it would look like if we in New England electrified transportation and how those health benefits stack up between now and 2050. And the benefits are on the order of billions of dollars. So even if the human suffering, I think, is a good enough reason to electrify, but if you need to see a value on it, the value is very, very large of electrifying cars and trains and buses and all of these things. The main reason why electric vehicles are so much cleaner, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and the pollutants that harm our health, is that they are much more efficient than gas-powered cars. So a gas-powered car wastes 80% of the energy in every gallon of gasoline. So every time you add a gallon of gasoline to your tank, 20% of it actually gets translated into running the car and moving the car. 80% is lost, mostly to friction and heat, which is really incredible if you think about how long we've been working on internal combustion engines. That's a lot of loss. Electric vehicles, because they're basically simple motors and computers, are much more efficient. So they are closer to 60, 70, 80% efficient. So the amount of energy that they lose is much less. One easy way to understand that is to look at the miles per gallon and the miles per gallon electric of popular cars. Mpge is a measure of efficiency, and it basically says how far will that car go on the amount of electricity or the amount of energy that is stored in a gallon of gasoline. So 1 gallon of gasoline is equivalent to 33.7 kilowatt hours. So by using miles per gallon and miles per gallon electric, you can compare these on the same scale. So if you're looking at the graph on the right, you can see the miles per gallon of some popular gas-powered cars, all of which are somewhere between 18 and 30 miles per gallon. Then you've got your traditional hybrids like the Prius that Ralph mentioned earlier. They get somewhere between 40 and 50 miles per gallon. Plug-in hybrids like the Toyota Prius Prime, the Chevy Volt with a V as a Victor, the Outlander, they get somewhere between 70 and 130 miles per gallon electric. And then the all-electric vehicles blow everybody else out of the water, basically, are well over 100 miles per gallon electric. So that is sort of the underlying principle that explains the sort of two previous benefits that we talked about, but it's also what underlies some of the benefits to consumers. So moving now from sort of big picture to you as an individual driver, what are the benefits of electric vehicles? The first is lower fuel costs. So it is cheaper to drive a mile on electricity than it is to drive a mile on gas. There's a couple different ways of looking at this. One is our own math, which we do once a quarter, and we really need to update now that gas prices have gone up quite a bit. But basically, you can look at this on our website if you are a math nerd and you want to understand this. But basically, once a quarter, we look at average gas prices, electricity prices, and the average number of miles that folks in Massachusetts drive per year, and we do some math. So the last time we did this, we found that the average Massachusetts driver saves about 4 cents per mile if you're switching from the average gas-powered car to the average all-electric car. And that adds up to a couple $100 per year. This is all despite the fact that New England has high electricity prices, and I did not update this slide, no longer has low gas prices. The last time we did this, we had low gas prices. But these savings are really still present, and one of the reasons that folks are choosing electric vehicles over gas-powered ones. On the right, this is an updated slide, is a screenshot from the Department of Energy. They have a tool called eGallon, where every day they show the average gas price in every state and then what they calculate as an eGallon, which is basically the amount of money you would have to pay to drive the same distance that a gallon of gasoline would get you. And it's just a handy way to compare prices without having to do a whole lot of math yourself. So when I took this screenshot last week, average gas price was $2.74 and the electric eGallon price was $1.96. So that's a way to sort of figure out what this would mean for you. The last point that I want to make here is that electricity prices are much more stable than gas prices, particularly if you live in Brookline and you have a municipal aggregation where you've got your city looking out for you and negotiating good prices on your behalf. And what that means is it's much easier for you to predict what your costs will be, and you're less beholden to swings in the market like we're seeing right now where prices are increasing for reasons that are way outside of our control. So that is the first sort of benefit to mention for electric vehicle drivers. This is a graph from the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency earlier this year. They produced annual fuel cost ranges for light duty vehicles by technology type. So these are national averages. So that's one important thing to keep in mind because we do have slightly higher electricity prices than the rest of the country, but that should be captured in the general range. But you can see that gasoline vehicles have both the largest range of costs and also go up to the highest costs in terms of annual fuel costs. Next step down is hybrid vehicles. Next step down from that is plug-in hybrid, and then all electric vehicles have the lowest fuel costs of all of these different segments. And that is supported by the experience of the folks who have gotten cars through our program. From that, I will move on to maintenance, which is basically the other big place where EV drivers see savings. So an internal combustion engine has hundreds of moving parts that can break or corrode or need replacement. And electric vehicle engines are much simpler in contrast. So there's basically fewer moving parts and therefore fewer things that can break and be in need of replacement. And the battery, motor, and electronics themselves require very little maintenance. So what we found is that electric vehicle maintenance costs are much lower than gas-powered vehicle maintenance costs. So the best resource on this front is a report that Consumer Reports put out at the end of 2020. They studied thousands of real-life drivers' costs to do a whole lot of math, and I definitely encourage you to check out this report if you're interested, but they found that switching from a gas-powered car to an electric car cuts your maintenance and repair costs in half. This is one of the things that when we ask folks who've gotten cars through a program, like, what do you love about your car? This is one of the things that they talk about, that they don't have to go get their oil changed if they've got a battery electric vehicle, don't have to worry about the brake pads wearing out as quickly. So this is definitely one of the benefits that you can expect if you make the switch. One thing I want to call out in particular is a technology that both makes the driving experience more pleasant, but also feeds into these lower maintenance costs, and that's regenerative braking. So basically, if you're driving an electric car and you take your foot off of the accelerator, the car will recognize that you would like to slow down and will slow you down without you having to use the friction brakes, basically by running magnets around the wheels. And that allows it to capture energy that might have otherwise been lost to friction and put it back into the battery. And that has two impacts for you. One is that your range is extended because you're taking energy that would have been lost otherwise and putting it right back into the battery. But it also means that you don't have to use your friction brakes as often or as strongly, which means that they last longer. So there's lots of little technologies like this built into the cars that mean there's just fewer repairs needed over the life of the vehicle. Here is another graph for folks who like graphs. This one is from the Department of Energy. And it shows you the scheduled maintenance costs for ICE vehicles, so internal combustion vehicles, that's the column on the left. Hybrid electric vehicles, so those are traditional hybrids like the Toyota Prius, is the next column. The third column is plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and then the fourth column is pure battery electric vehicles. And you can see how each step closer to a battery electric reduces those maintenance costs. And I'm happy to share these slides after the presentation if you really want to dig into what all of those colors mean. But it's just another way of presenting basically the same information, that those maintenance costs are lower the closer you get to a battery electric vehicle. Finally, if you put those two things together, fuel costs and maintenance costs, you can expect significant savings over the life of the vehicle. And here I would point you back to that Consumer Reports study. They found that electric vehicles are cost effective when compared to the best-selling, top-rated, and most efficient cars in every vehicle class. So that's always true whether you're talking about a sedan or an SUV or even a pickup truck. And in their reporting and in their study, they include things like financing, depreciation, resale value, excuse me. And so it's a really good report. You can dig into things like the graph on the left, which show you how much those lifetime savings vary by a vehicle class. And you can look up specific cars that you're interested in. The one caveat is that the gas and electricity price information that went into that report is a national average. It's generalized, so the numbers will be slightly different for us because we do have slightly higher electricity prices, but the main message of the report still holds true in Massachusetts. And then last but not least, these vehicles are really fun to drive. And I say this as a person who does not actually very much care about cars. I care about climate change and people's health a lot, but these vehicles are just superior products. They accelerate much faster than a gas-powered car. They're comfortable. They've got all the newfangled safety features that everybody's looking for, and they're quiet. So I'm happy to chat about all that some more, but this is, I think, a good place to pause and see if there are any questions. And I will, Ralph and Michelle, I will ask you to tell me if there are questions because I would have to stop screen sharing to see the question list. Ralph, I think you were speaking, but I cannot hear you. Is it just me?
I think you're still muted.
I think I'm up now.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I do not see any questions in the chat myself. I don't know, Michelle, do you see anybody?
No, nobody has put in any questions in chat. You're welcome to do that. Or if you'd like to take yourself off mute and, you know, where there's a decent number of us, I think we could do it that way as well. Looks like there is one question that just came in. Who makes a Clarity, I believe is the question.
The Clarity was Honda's plug-in hybrid, and it is an excellent car, but Honda made the strategic decision to just sell it on the West Coast. So it was here for about 6 months or a year. Lots of people loved it, and then they decided to no longer sell it on the East Coast. To speak a little bit to the sort of underlying question underneath that, different automakers are taking different approaches to electrifying. So some of them are way out in front, making this sort of what their brand will be for the coming years. And then there are others that are really dragging their heels a little bit and producing vehicles to comply with regulations, but not really heavily leaning on.
Are you getting stuff? Yeah.
So Honda is definitely one of those that is dragging its feet. So they produced the Clarity as a compliance car basically for the California regulations, but they haven't produced an all-electric vehicle, although there is one coming in the next couple of years. So that really, I think, explains that sort of strategic decision that they made, although I wish they had made a different decision.
Anna, there are a couple of other questions. Let me just go after them one by one, okay? Someone says, I have heard it takes a lot of energy to make the battery in the first place. For people who drive under 5,000 miles per year, does the carbon footprint make sense to get an EV?
Yes, so producing an electric vehicle does produce more greenhouse gas emissions than producing a gas-powered car. However, that you quickly make the difference up once you start driving the vehicle. I don't remember exactly what the number of miles or number of year cutoff is, but I would point you to the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have a study called From Cradle to Grave, where they do this math and they show for different markets basically where that cutoff point is. The other point I would make is that there are increasingly used electric vehicles available. Right now, it's very hard to get a used vehicle, period. So that's true for electric cars as well. But that is one way to drive electric and get the benefits of those reduced greenhouse gas emissions and all the pollutants that harm public health, but really sort of stretch out the impact of that battery and use the vehicle's full life.
So there are two related comments that I'm going to meld into one from me to you to respond to, okay?
Okay.
What is the average life of the battery in an EV and what happens to dispose of it when it is done? The other question is similar. Can you speak of the life cycle of the vehicles in terms of what is the recycling plan for EV components, especially the battery?
Yes, so the batteries are generally warrantied for 8 years or 100,000 miles. Early studies of how well they perform are really corroborating the claim of manufacturers that the batteries last as long as the vehicle. So I don't think people need to worry about replacing a vehicle's battery before the end of the vehicle's life. In terms of life cycle, there are a couple of promising developments, but we are just still at the beginning of this transition, so there's no sort of firm plan that I can point to, but basically these batteries are all lithium-ion batteries and they have metals and minerals in them that have value still at the end of the life. So once a battery has degraded enough that it's no longer useful in a vehicle, it still has the capacity to store a whole lot of energy. So we've already seen second life applications of used electric vehicle batteries, basically as stationary storage. So you can use old electric vehicle batteries to help store backup energy at a power plant or at a commercial or industrial site. We've already seen that in Europe and in Japan, that they're using old electric vehicle batteries as backup power to help manage supply and demand on the electric grid. And then the other thing is recycling. So battery recycling is a hot topic. There are lots of people figuring out what the best way to do it is. There's no sort of fixed stream yet, but that is because we are really at the beginning of this process. But one thing that I'm personally particularly heartened to see is Ford, in talking about their new F-150 Lightning and the Mach-E, is talking a lot about trying to set up a closed loop to reuse as much as they can. So they've partnered with a company called Redwood Materials that exists solely to figure out battery recycling. And there's lots of other startups and other companies that are trying to figure this out. So I think this is something that is really important and needs attention in the coming years. But I do think that because the batteries still have value at the end of the life of the car, it's unlikely that we're just going to chuck them in a landfill. We'll find a way to either use them again or recapture those minerals to build new things.
So here's another one that's related. Are you aware of models or calculators that factor in the full life cycle of owning an EV? You know, the cost of battery and fabrication and battery, et cetera.
Is this a question about the greenhouse gas emissions produced in the life cycle or the costs?
I'm not sure, Todd, if you want to liven up your mic. why don't you expand your question?
Sure. I was thinking in terms of carbon costs. I wasn't very clear. I sent it before I meant to. I hit send before I finished the message. But yeah, I was thinking of the carbon impacts mostly. I mean, I know that the extractive aspect of mining lithium is pretty intensive, and just wondering, you know, and this kind of feeds into another question, which is what is the future? You know, you mentioned earlier that lithium seems to be the future of electric vehicles, but is that really true? I know that there's lots of startups looking at alternate technologies for batteries, but anyway, just getting back to that question is the carbon impact and the extractive intensity of it.
That is the Union of Concerned Scientists study that I mentioned earlier, the From Cradle to Grave. That's exactly what that addresses. So it looks at the full life cycle.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I do see that someone has posted in the comments a link to the Union Scientists study from 2015, cleaner cars from cradle to grave. So that must be a study of that sort. Stephen Claudio is with us. I walked into Audi Brookline a couple weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon because I was curious about the availability of the chargers that they have at their dealership there to the public. And I got the answer to that, and I'll save that for next week on charging. But I introduced myself, and Stephen, who's a sales manager at Audi Brookline, was very interested in what we were doing, and I invited him to join us and comment again, particularly next week about the charging and Audi's plans there. But I see in the comment here that Stephen is helping to answer some of the questions. And if there's something you want to comment on now, Stephen, please do. And even a tiny bit of plumping for Audi probably would be okay. You there?
Let's see. Yes, sorry. So let me know if I popped up. I have no idea if everything's working. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can see you. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to just start back with, I was a post here from Dara asking about the, is it worth an EV vehicle if you're driving so few miles per year? And then basically the energy and the cost of creating a battery in the first place. Audi isn't the only one to do this, so I don't have to speak solely for Audi. I can safely say that a lot of manufacturers are actually leaning towards even their production plants becoming completely net carbon by neutral by 2025 to 2030, anywhere in between that range. I know Audi's will be 2025 is what they're shooting for, meaning, I mean, even the production plants alone are on board with this goal of what we're reviewing here today. Now, the actual battery itself, a lot of manufacturers are also doing this when it comes down to cost and efficiency and lifespan of these batteries. It's not just one large battery. It isn't just like a battery you'll pull out of a pack and pop into a remote controller, for instance. It's more of a large platform with a bunch of individual cells. Now, those individual cells can fail individually, or they can all work together, right? To basically give the complete output and power in the car. If one cell does fail, it doesn't cause the whole battery to die. And of course, with the manufacturer can just replace that one individual cell within the battery to make sure nothing goes wrong further. And the warranties they're offering, as what that was already covered, the 8-year 100K. Think of it this way. I mean, almost anything out there with a warranty is almost promised and guaranteed to at least last that span. And that goes for anything. That's not just cars. It goes for most products that you buy on a day-to-day basis, any sort of electronics. And that the life cycle, you can definitely expect 8 years plus out of it, 8 to 10 years, which most owners will own their car. That's of course the number, the years that someone owns a car is going downwards, but 8 to 10 years is pretty high up there. A lot of people are like rotating out of cars up at like 6 years, 3 years now, if you're leasing.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. That's helpful. Anna, do you have some more slides that you were going to put up after this pause? Because I had a question but I think you may be addressing them in the
You bet I
slides.
have
So,
your slides.
yeah,
I'm about to
so-
talk about charging.
okay, yeah. So why don't we transition back to your presentation, and there's going to be time later on to talk about other concerns that may come up. So please go
Okay.
ahead.
Great. Some things you should know if you are considering going electric. The first is that range anxiety, which is a term you might have heard, is a thing of the past. So range anxiety is the fear that you're going to suddenly run out of charge and get stuck somewhere because you don't have enough power in your battery. There's really two reasons why once people make the switch to an electric car, this fear kind of dissipates. The first is that the range of electric vehicles that are on the market today far surpasses what most people drive in a day. So most people drive somewhere between 30 and 50 miles a day in Massachusetts. The battery electric vehicles that are out there are at this point well over 200 miles per charge, which means you can do your daily driving and charge up at home overnight if you can do that, or at work or at a public charging station. And then for folks who are still a little nervous about this or need to be able to drive longer distances without stopping to charge, there are plug-in hybrid options that are excellent. So these are vehicles where you can do most of your daily driving on electricity, but then you have that backup gas tank to fall on if you need it. The other thing that I like to stress here is that the manufacturers of these vehicles know that this is your primary fear. So they've invested a lot in really sophisticated battery management software so that you know at all times how many miles of range you have left on your vehicle. So on all of these cars, dashboards, basically, there is a display at all times saying you have this many miles of range left. And usually it'll give you like a medium estimate, a low estimate, and a high estimate. And it's adjusted constantly in real time. So if you suddenly start blasting the heat, the car will adjust that estimate down. And most of them also take into account things like the temperature outside, or how you drive. If the car has learned that you're a really aggressive driver who slams on the accelerator and then slams on the brakes, it'll take that into account in its estimate for you. And what that means is you're never going to suddenly realize that you have only 10 miles of range left. You'll see at all times where you're at, and that adjusts in real time. So if you do need to make a stop to find charging on a road trip, you have ample time to do that and to find a charging station. And I'll talk about how to find a charging station in a moment. But before I do that, I just want to go over some of the basics of charging. So there are 3 basic levels for charging your electric car. The first is called a level 1 charge, and it's when you take the cord that comes with the vehicle and plug it into a normal 110, 120 household outlet. This is also called a trickle charge because it's the slowest charging option, but it adds about 4 miles of range per hour spent charging. This sounds really slow, but it actually is plenty for a lot of people. So if you drive around 40 miles a day, and you are able to charge at home overnight, if you plug in your vehicle for 10 hours at a normal household outlet, that'll replenish what you've used in a day. So for lots of folks, this is actually much easier and much more convenient than they think. The next level up is called level 2 charging, and that requires a 220 volt outlet, which is the same type of outlet you would have installed for an all-electric dryer or an electric stove. And that adds somewhere between 10 and 25 miles of range per hour spent charging, depending on the vehicle and the charging unit that you choose. You can install one of these in your home. You basically just need to purchase a unit, which you can do online or at a home improvement store, and then you have an electrician hook it up to a 220 volt outlet. But if you've seen any public charging stations out and about in like supermarket parking lots, they're probably level 2 charging stations. The third type of charging is called DC fast charging, and this is the super, super high-powered stuff that you see increasingly at rest stops along highways and places like that. It can usually fill up about 80% of your battery in half an hour. So for the Chevy Bolt, for example, it does 90 to 100 miles in 30 minutes. These are not stations that you can install at home because they're direct current. So these are really stations that you would use if you're going on a road trip and you need to charge up quickly along the way. So those are the three basic types. In terms of plug types, there's a couple things you should know. The first is that Tesla has its own proprietary charging system. They have their own charging port. You can only use a Tesla charging station if you drive a Tesla. So they're basically their own whole category. Everybody else uses the same standard for level 1 and level 2 charging, and that is the J1772. I have no idea why it's called that, but that's what it's called. And in the top right-hand corner, you can see what that plug type actually looks like. For DC fast charging, this is the only place where it gets a little bit tricky. And the good news is it's actually going to get better. Right now, there's basically two standards. There's the SAE combo, which is basically the J1772 with two extra prongs right underneath. You can see it on the right in the middle. That is the standard used by American and European manufacturers. So if you, for example, choose a Chevy Bolt with a DC fast charger, it's going to have the J1772 combo charging port. Up until now, Asian manufacturers have used a different standard, which is called CHAdeMO, which is in the bottom right, which you can see looks completely different from the J1772 combo. So up until now, if you've had a Nissan Leaf, for example, it has had a CHAdeMO plug if it can do DC fast charging. The good news is that, well, two pieces of good news. One is that if you're pulling up to a DC fast charging station, it probably has a cord for each type. So you can, on all of the various apps that I'll talk about in a moment, where you can find public charging, they'll tell you whether it's a CHAdeMO plug or a J1772, so you know what's available at that charging station. But secondly, it looks like the market is kind of settling on the J1772 combo for the upcoming Nissan Ariya, which is Nissan's new all-electric vehicle that will arrive here sometime in 2022. They've chosen for the American market to use the J1772 combo instead of the CHAdeMO. So it looks like we're sort of settling on one standard for DC fast charging. So to summarize, 3 basic levels of charging and a couple different standards, but mostly it's quite easy once you get in a car to find charging. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, most electric vehicle drivers right now do charge at home. And you can do that again by either plugging into a normal wall socket or by installing one of these level 2 chargers. To help folks decide what would work for them, depending on what car they're looking for, we wrote a guide to installing electric vehicle charging at home that you can use whether you are determined to get an electric car and you just want to know what kind of charging you need and you want to know what questions to ask your electrician, for example. But you can also use it if you are kind of on the fence about getting an electric car and you're trying to figure out, can I even support charging at home? It has questions to walk you through what you might be looking for in terms of a car and in terms of charging. And then there's a checklist that you can use to figure out what you need to ask of your electrician in advance. So the full guide is available on our website, and I'm happy to share a link to that after this presentation as well. And we also, I should mention, have just released an equivalent for folks who live in apartments and condos, how to think about charging if you don't own your home.
Anna, this is Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just interrupt you because a couple of quick questions came in the comments that I think you just handled, okay? One is, does the faster charging types, type 2 or DC fast charging, do they reduce battery life?
So the batteries do not like getting hot. So the main thing is that DC fast charging, if you use it daily or very frequently, it will reduce your battery's lifespan because you're introducing more heat into the battery. So level 1 and level 2 are fine. They're slow enough that the vehicle is just taking power and it's not getting too hot. DC fast charging is a little bit more intense, and therefore it adds a little bit more wear and tear to the battery. For most people, this is not noticeable at all. So if you are doing DC fast charging every now and then, or when you're going on a road trip, that'll be fine. Yes, it'll wear down your battery a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not noticeable. The places that we've heard where people really start noticing this is folks who, for example, use battery electric cars and drive for Uber like 20 hours a day and rely on DC fast charging. There, they've started noticing the impact a little bit more. But for most sort of normal, quote unquote, normal drivers, if you use it every now and then, it's not a big deal at all.
And let me ask, as I said, I invited a number of guests to be on who own EVs. Is there any one of you folks that might want to put up your hand now on the video? I can see you and comment on your own experience with batteries so far. I don't know how long you've owned EVs, what kind of charging you're doing typically and so forth. So I'm just inviting anybody who wants to jump in, but to put up their hand if I see it. And mute yourself. Boris, I see you unmuted yourself. So you want to jump in for a sec?
Sure. So I'm on my second EV. I have a Tesla Model Y. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a Chevy Bolt previously, and now we have a Tesla Model Y. For the most part, I charge either in my garage with a regular 110 or 120 volt outlet, so the regular house outlet essentially. That's the what I usually do. I also charge pretty regularly actually in some of the public chargers around Brookline because they are all free. I'm not sure if that was mentioned today or not, but all of those are free and they are the level 2 chargers, so they're much faster. I very rarely use the superchargers or the fast chargers, the DC fast chargers. The only time I do use those are on road trips. And the reason we got the Model Y and got rid of the Bolt is because we did do as a family a cross-country, cross-continent trip to the West Coast and back. We sort of did a loop of the country. And we did use fast charging to complete that. It was really a non-issue. It was so simple to find chargers, at least Tesla chargers. Tesla fast chargers, and we did spend more than a month on the road doing that road trip, doing fast charging. But on a day basis, I don't use fast chargers at all. I just use regular garage outlet or the free chargers around Brookline.
Thank you. Tom Barrasso asked a question: are people installing single head or dual head levels when they're installing level 2 charging in their homes? And I see that Stephen in the chat has responded to that directly in some ways. So Tom, please take a look at that. But Anna, do you have anything to say about that in terms of what most people are installing when they do have level 2 in their homes?
When installing level 2, most people are installing single head charging units. So basically there's one cord coming out of the machine. Even for folks in our program who have more than one electric car, I think they've just installed the one charger and kind of rotate which car is charging. The only place that we're seeing multiple head chargers is in multi-unit dwellings. So if you've got a whole apartment building that you're trying to supply some charging to, there it might make sense to do dual head chargers. Same thing with condos. But for single family homes, I haven't heard of a whole lot of people installing more than one level 2 charging unit.
Thank you. Alan, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, as far as my personal charging on the car, we've got a Tesla Model 3 long range. It's got a 353 mile range, so range is not an issue. We drove out to Cleveland this summer, a few weeks after we got it, and there were superchargers between here and Cleveland on Interstate 90 on average every 50 miles. And I can easily drive a couple of 100 miles without having to charge. In fact, much more than that if I want to let the battery go lower. At home, I live in a condo in Brookline, a big condo. We installed a charge point. It's a commercial type charger that you would see in a like at the town of Brookline parking lots. We've installed that, and we put in a dual head charger. As Anna said, we have a lot of residents here, and we're starting to get more EVs, so we went with a dual head for that purpose. I would say on the dual head charger, I saw somebody type something in about being much slower on single head, I think, versus dual head. At least on the charge point dual head chargers, you have a choice of how you set them up. You can set them up so each head has 40 amps available, in which case it's like having two totally separate chargers. Or you can charge it up with one, you can set it up with one 40 amp circuit. And if you have two cars on there, it slows down so that you don't draw more than 40 amps total. So you do have some choice on how you use a dual head charger.
Thank you. Anna, I think you had some more slides. Maybe it's time to go back to those.
Okay. So what is next is talking about charging on the go. There are a lot more charging stations than most people realize, and that is because they are not marketed the way that gas stations are. So gas stations have big signs on the side of the highway, and it's really hard to miss them. Electric vehicle charging stations are largely in places where people already spend a fair amount of time. So there are lots of different networks or companies that are building out networks of charging stations. So Alan just mentioned ChargePoint. That's one of the bigger ones in this area, but there's others that are building out these stations and connecting them. So you might have heard of EVgo or Electrify America. All of these are different companies that have their own network of charging stations. We really like the website PlugShare, which is also available as an app because it is crowdsourced and platform neutral. So you can see all of these different companies on the same map, basically, without having to go to each sort of proprietary website. So these are some screenshots that we took just to give folks a sense of what's there. This is the kind of website where if you zoom in, more things pop up. So I definitely recommend that you go to PlugShare. And if folks are interested, we can even do that in real time after this presentation. But basically, you can put in any address in the country and it'll show you nearby charging stations. Anything that is green is a level 2 charging station, and anything that is orange is a DC fast charging station. And you can also sort and filter by different characteristics. So if you only want to see Tesla's charging stations, it'll show those to you. If you only want to see level 2 charging stations, it'll show you that. It also has the option to do route planning. So if you know that you want to drive from here to Buffalo, New York, and you want to see what charging stations are available along the route, you can do that. There's also another resource called A Better Route Planner, which is really excellent for planning long trips as well. The last thing that I'll mention about PlugShare is that because it is crowdsourced, you can click on any of these little icons to learn more about the charging stations. So it'll tell you where they are, it'll tell you how much it costs to park and or charge. A lot of these stations are free. As someone mentioned, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Boris, I think. But if there is a cost, then you can see what it is and how to pay for it all in this map. So I definitely recommend that you take a look at PlugShare to see what kind of charging is available around you. So the last kind of section or last part of this section is the different purchase and lease incentives that are available to you if you're thinking about making the switch. And I'll start at the top and then work my way down. So right now there is a federal tax credit, for the purchase of an electric vehicle. So this is potentially going to change in the next week, and I kind of hope it does, but the way it's currently set up, there's a federal tax credit of up to $7,500. And I say up to for a couple different reasons. The first is that it depends on the battery size of the vehicle. So if you're getting an all-electric vehicle, it qualifies for the full $7,500. But if you are getting a plug-in hybrid that has a smaller battery, you'll get a smaller tax rebate. And it is some crazy wonky formula. So for the Toyota Prius Prime, I think it's $4,503 or something like that. We have all that information on our website. So if you want to see a certain vehicle, you can find out what the federal tax credit is. The other reason I say up to is that it depends on your personal tax liability. So if you don't owe $7,500 in federal taxes, you unfortunately cannot, the way it's currently set up, carry over any difference from one year to the next, and the IRS will unfortunately not write you a check for whatever difference there might be. One way to get around that is to lease the vehicle. If you lease an electric car, the value of the federal tax credit is basically captured by the dealer/manufacturer. And most of them have made the decision to pass that value on to the consumer in the form of lower monthly payments. So a lot of folks are finding themselves leasing electric cars who might not have ever considered it otherwise, but one of the reasons is that that allows you to capture that federal tax credit if you don't have the personal tax liability to do so. The last thing you should know is that the federal tax credit, when it was set up, was intended to jumpstart the industry and then kind of fade into the background. So once a manufacturer has sold 200,000 units in the United States, that federal tax credit starts phasing out. So far, General Motors and Tesla have hit that 200,000 mark, and the federal tax credit has faded out for them. So if you buy a General Motors or Tesla vehicle at this point, there is no federal tax credit. All of these developments in Washington could change this. There are proposals to get rid of the cap, to extend the cap. We'll just see what happens when they finally produce a final bill. But this is definitely one of the tools available on the federal level that I know the Biden administration is taking very seriously to accelerate EV adoption, making this federal tax credit better and more accessible to more people. So definitely stay tuned on that front.
I would just editorialize on this that, the original Biden bill for $3.5 billion has been whittled down quite a bit, even as the administration is proposing. This is one that has stayed pretty stable throughout all of that. The Biden administration really think it's important to do this in a pretty big way. And so a lot of these things are, I would say, are more likely than not to change for the better.
It does help that right now the manufacturers that are being basically penalized by the phase out are American manufacturers, and it's foreign manufacturers who can still take advantage of the incentive. And it also helps that companies like Ford and General Motors are really talking about and investing a lot of capital in preparing to produce more electric vehicles in the coming years. So that is one thing I'm cautiously hopeful about. Taking one step down, Massachusetts does have a rebate. If you purchase or lease an electric vehicle as a Massachusetts resident, you can apply for the state More EV rebate. It's $2,500 for battery electric vehicles and $1,500 for plug-in hybrids, as long as those plug-in hybrids have at least 25 miles of electric range. And one blanket rule across the board is that the final sales price has to be under $50,000 for you to qualify. But basically, if you purchase or lease a vehicle and meet these requirements, you go to moreev.org, fill out an application, and then you can receive a check in the mail from the state to help cover part of the cost of making that choice. And then finally, as Ralph mentioned at the very beginning of all of this, Green Energy Consumers runs a program called Drive Green, which Stephen, you'll be getting an email from me to hopefully join. But we have a network of dealerships across Massachusetts and Rhode Island who post prices on our website. So if you are interested in an electric car, you can come to the website, learn about the different makes and models, and then if you're interested, sign up to test drive through our forum and get connected with a dealership in the state. And the dealers post discounted prices. So you can see what the price is before the discount, the special discount that they're offering through our program, federal tax credit, state rebate, and see the final price at the end. One caveat is that right now the car market is insane, so there are not as many discounts as there have been in the past. But we've been running this program since 2016, and usually the dealers on our website are offering a couple $1,000 discount in addition to that state rebate and the federal tax credit. So our hope is not only to make the cars more affordable, but also more accessible, because we can connect you with the right salesperson at the dealership who can really actually answer your questions about the car and hopefully get you in one with less obstacles that you might run into otherwise. So I can talk about that program a little bit more in the final part of this program. But first, I want to see if there's any more questions that I should answer from the chat.
There was one, hold on, pardon me.
Okay, I've also since figured out how to find the chat, so I can see it now too. I see there's a question about conditions or limits in the manufacturer's warranty for batteries related to DC fast charging. I don't think there are. Stephen, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the main limitations are if you somehow hijack your car system to export power or basically mess with the hardware, then you've got a problem. But the manufacturers are not paying attention to how much DC fast charging you're doing, because they know that you need to be able to DC fast charge to drive. So that's my understanding, but maybe Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong.
I was just typing in the chat. So it's nothing regarding DC fast charging at all. Only if, as you said, if you tamper with any of the power systems and there's proof of it, or if you're utilizing non-approved battery sources or maintainers for your battery. Besides that, nope, nothing about overusing DC charging.
So let me ask a question that's related to that, I think, which is that there's a lot of talk about how, you know, once the fleet is electrified, and frankly, once the grid is geared up to do this, that automobile batteries could provide power back to the grid during peak demand moments in the day. And right now, we don't have the sophistication, at least in Massachusetts, to be doing that. I understand that that is starting to happen in Europe. Is there, if you were to buy an EV today, would the software in the car and the battery management in the car, you know, be set up to be able to do that, or is that going to be the next generation of cars? Is that even a sensible question?
It is a sensible question. So my understanding is that up until now, it's the CHAdeMO chargers have the protocol built in that allows for the vehicle to export power. So most of the vehicle to grid pilots that have happened in this country and also in Europe are using the Nissan Leaf, because that is one of the vehicles that has the CHAdeMO plug. As I just mentioned, Nissan is phasing out the CHAdeMO plug, but my understanding is that manufacturers know this is coming and they're basically updating the J1772 combo to allow for bidirectional power flow in future cars. So I think at this point, it's like depending on which car and which model year, some of them are ready, some of them aren't, but that's something that is on our list of things to research more fully. So far, there's no program in Massachusetts that would support that, but I think it's in the works. One thing I do want to make a quick call out for is that this whole presentation is about personal vehicles, but we really need to electrify everything. And one particularly exciting application is electric school buses, particularly because diesel school buses are some of the worst offenders in terms of public health. And there's actually a really cool pilot happening right now in Beverly, Massachusetts, which has an electric school bus that actually participated in the power markets this summer and exported power in moments of peak demand and got reimbursed for that, basically. So electric school buses are really exciting on that front because they have fixed routes and they spend a whole lot of time just sitting there, particularly in the summer. So that's, I think, a space where that sort of vehicle to grid application will move faster than personal cars.
Yes, and I would supplement that with the fact that the utility companies in Massachusetts, in their proposals that are now pending for approval at the Department of Public Utilities, are seeking authority to go ahead and spend some money on, you know, fleet programs, including subsidies for school buses in some of the parts of the state and so forth. So there's a lot of attention to this going on at the policy level, both at the utilities and obviously the state in these other arenas beyond passenger vehicles.
If it's all right with you, I'll just quickly move on to the last section of this, which is basically a quick look at our website.
Please do.
Okay. So, oops. So there are a couple things that I want to call your attention to that are options on our website. One is that we have a Drive Green community Facebook group. So if you want to ask your questions to a group of people who actually drive these cars and get a sense from them about their experience, that is a great COVID-friendly way to do that. We also have a pledge that if you're not in the market for a car right now, but you want to stay up to date, you can sign our pledge that your next car will be electric, and we'll let you know when new vehicles get released or there's exciting deals or things like that. We also have a quarterly newsletter. So if you want to just once a quarter hear what the latest developments are and stay up to date that way, that's a great way to do that. And then finally, we have a coffee hour coming up in December. The theme has actually changed from plug-in hybrids to road trips, but basically we get a bunch of EV owners on a Zoom and have a conversation. It's not scripted. It is just a Zoom meeting where people can chat, but you can ask your questions of real life drivers and get some honest answers from folks who've actually adopted this technology. So I'm happy to send all of those links after the fact, but I will very quickly just pull up our website. And I need to reshare my screen to do that. So if you're interested in an electric car, you can come to greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen. You can learn a lot more about all the topics that I just spoke about. If you want to go review how charging works or the public health benefits or all that, we have pages on each of those topics. If you want to take the pledge or sign up for the newsletter or come to one of the events that I mentioned, you can do that on the Take Action page. We also link to the Drive Green community Facebook group here. But really, if you're ready to think about getting a car, if you come here and check off explore the cars and discounts and make it to our charging portal, you have two options. So first, if you're interested in a new car, you can come here and learn about the different models that are generally available in New England. So for each of the cars, we post any important information we think you should know off the bat, and then the same sort of specs for each car. What type it is, the range, the style, whether it's all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive or what have you, the base MSRP, the federal tax credit, the state rebate. We link to the manufacturer's websites. But basically, you can scroll through, learn more about each of these cars. You can also sort and filter by different characteristics. So if you are sure that you want a battery electric vehicle that gets over 200 miles of range, we can just show you those options. And then when you're ready, you can select a car and hit next, learn about the different trim levels that are available, check off the ones that you're interested in, and then see local deals. So in normal times, all of the deals would be filled out like this with the price before discount, the discount, the Massachusetts state rebate, the federal tax credit, and the final price. As you can see right now, we don't have discounts for a lot of cars, and that's because demand is so high for a lot of these cars that dealers they're just flying off the shelves. So that is something that we hope, as the chip shortage hopefully gets settled in the coming months, we'll be back to offering some good discounts. For some of the vehicles, we have pre-order lists up because right now it's very hard to find a Nissan Leaf, for example, until the 2022 models arrive later this year. So if you're interested in one of those cars, you can get on a list and basically hear from us as soon as they're ready. But basically, you just check off whatever dealers you want to be put in touch with, and then you fill in your contact information so that we can send it to the dealership and say, this is a Drive Green program participant. they qualify for the listed price. And you get an email saying you signed up for this car at this dealership. Here's the specific salesperson that you should ask for when you call. They're the ones that know about the vehicle and about the program. We as green energy consumers are still available if you have any questions. So if you run into any trouble with the dealership or have a question about pricing or anything else, you can call us, you can email us, you can even chat with us during office hours. And we're there to really smooth out that whole process. The other thing that I want to highlight real quick is that we do have a pre-owned portal. So here, instead of posting the specific deals at dealerships, we have listed all of the historical, basically model years of the cars that are actually available on the used market here. So if you are really excited about the BMW i3, but you don't know what the difference between the 2019 version and the 2017 version is, in terms of range or price or anything like that, you can come here and sort and filter by different characteristics again. So we show the original electric range, the style, and whatever sort of fast facts we think you need to know. And then we also have Kelley Blue Book fair purchase prices, a low and a high range, so that you can get a sense of, okay, if I have $10,000 to spend on a used car, what are my options on the used market? You can use this to narrow down to certain models and model years, and then you can go to Carvana or cars.com or whatever you want to use to find a used car with that sort of narrowing down already happened. So we think that's a really, hopefully, a really helpful tool for folks because particularly on the used front, a model year difference could be a really big difference in terms of range or body style. So it's important to know exactly what you're looking for, and we hope this tool can help.
Let's shift for, I was like, finish up, please go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to say that's it. I hope you have questions.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to see the pre-owned EVs and from the past, but look forward a bit. There were a couple of references, but not much detail, and maybe there isn't much detail to give about where the manufacturers are. But you know, I think just from reading the regular news, we understand that there's some manufacturers already that are committing to not sell anything but EVs at various states down the road. I think for GM, it's 3035. For some other manufacturers, 2030. Oh, yes, 2035. Thank you. And some of the other manufacturers are even earlier, and just about everybody's getting into the game pretty heavily. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Is there much you can, definition you can put to that?
Yeah, so the short answer is there's a lot of exciting cars coming out in the next couple of years. Exactly when they will arrive here in Massachusetts is always a guessing game. Because the chip shortage is already delaying the release dates for some of these cars, and B, because they tend to get sold in California first because that's such a big market, and then they kind of trickle over here a little bit later. I think what I can do is call out a couple ones that we're really excited about. So historically, or the EV market started with sedans, small cars, because the smaller the car, the lighter the car, the less battery you need to move it. But battery technology is advanced enough that manufacturers are starting to produce larger cars, which from an environmental standpoint is not the best, because really we should all be driving the lightest cars we can to minimize our impact. But from a market perspective, is great because that's what Americans are buying. So in the coming years, a lot of the vehicles that are coming out are more crossover SUV and pickup trucky than the Nissan Leaf was or the Chevy Bolt was. So a couple ones that are coming out that are generating a lot of buzz is, of course, the Ford F-150 Lightning. It's the all-electric pickup truck from Ford that is massive and has a massive battery and has a lot of cool features, like it does have that vehicle-to-grid capability that we talked about earlier. That has generated a lot of press because it is really the first of its kind. There are a couple other cars that are coming out, like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which one of the options gets 300 miles per charge. So you can really see how battery technology is progressing. because the cars that are coming have much larger ranges than a lot of the cars we've seen thus far. I mentioned Nissan's new vehicle, the Ariya, which will be an all-electric SUV. Chevy has hinted that there's a Silverado EV coming out at some point. I don't have the Audi ones memorized, but I know that there's cool Audis coming too. Stephen could tell us about those. And a lot of the ones, basically on our website, we try and post the ones that are coming in the next year-ish, so that folks have a sense of what's coming. But the further you look out, the more announcements there have been. It's just that the ones that are coming in 2023 and 2024, we don't have as many details about. But I've rambled a lot. Long story short, there's some cool cars coming.
There was a question in the chat that you can see there from Dave and Daria O'Connor. Please describe the options for leasing EVs and PHEVs and if they include any tax credits or rebates.
Sure. So if you lease, to receive the state rebate, you have to lease it for 36 months, but that is basically what the standard lease is anyway. So basically, once you've taken possession of the vehicle, you fill out a form on the website and say, I'm leasing this for 36 months, and then they send you a check in the mail. So again, for a battery electric, that's $2,500. For a plug-in hybrid, it's $1,500, as long as the final sales price is under $50,000. For the federal tax credit, the dealer or the manufacturer, they get the federal tax credit. You don't get it if you lease, but most of them roll it into lower monthly payments. So if you are thinking about leasing a vehicle, you should ask the dealership, where is that federal tax credit going? And most of them will be able to point to it and say, here it is, you're getting it this way. There's a question about whether there's mileage restrictions on a lease as there are with gas vehicles. The answer is yes. And I will say that my parents leased a Bolt mostly because I wouldn't shut up about how much cleaner they are than gas-powered cars. And my mom at first was very hesitant to drive this new scary car that was all different. She wanted to make sure she read the instructions and understood how the car worked. And when we finally convinced her to just take the dang thing on a spin, she came back and was like, this is the best car I've ever driven. And now they have trouble staying under the mileage limit for the 3-year lease, because it's the preferred vehicle. So because it's comfortable and nice, they have to really pay attention that they're not going over the 10,000 miles or whatever it is a year. But that is something that you can negotiate at the time of lease. It's just if you have more miles per year, you'll pay a higher monthly payment. Yes, so Stephen, thank you for corroborating that most dealers just give the federal tax credit as basically a rebate upfront if you're leasing. And then there's a question about, for the master rebate, if the final sales price includes delivery and sales tax, or maybe it's a statement that it doesn't. I think it doesn't. It's pre-tax. I am happy to answer questions, but I'm also happy to shut up and let other people talk.
Yeah, does anybody else want to jump in and make a comment of any sort? We haven't gotten into the charging in the ways we will next week. We sort of take what we just did as the basic, but we're talking next week about some of the mechanics of charging in apartments and trying to get it into condominiums and so forth. And also some of the existing plans in Brookline. Also, those of you that are Brookline residents may know that there's a warrant article up for the special town meeting in a couple of weeks that will amend municipal zoning in Brookline to mandate that new construction of residential units in Brookline include EV charging and even the new commercial construction as well. at not 100%, but substantial charging. And also would apply as it's currently written to existing buildings that are being rehabbed to a very large extent, like 50% rehab. We'll see how that fares. It's going to be at town meeting, as I say, in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week because there are tomorrow not one, not two, but three town committees considering this proposal. So it may evolve from here. So there's going to be a lot more detail on charging next week. Does anybody have any other comments or questions they'd like to make tonight? This has been a very good hour and a half. Anna, thank you very much. It was terrific. And if we're done, we're done. Okay.
I saw Thomas unmute himself. So do you have a question or comment?
I don't want to delay everybody's departure, but I'll just mention that, you know, as the Director of Sustainability for Brookline, electrification is one of my top priorities under my strategic plan. And we are looking at the entire fleet. The issue there, of course, is, you know, what's available. So we're looking at things like street sweepers, the electric buses, garbage trucks, and the light duty vehicle. Again, not that we want to have giant pickup trucks, but we need those kind of things to do the daily tasks of like DPW. So that's difficult to do with a Nissan Leaf if you got to throw, you know, a couple of bags of coal patch and go out and fix a pothole. That's hard to do with a Nissan Leaf. Or you got to work at the water department. So we really need those kind of vehicles. It would be interesting to have something that's, you know, maybe less robust, but still big enough in terms of hauling a load. We don't need to go far, and we don't need to drive it, you know, 300 miles in a single whack. So that something like that hitting the market for more commercial use would be really interesting to see as that kind of evolves. The electric bus situation is kind of interesting because Brookline, as many other communities, do not own the fleet of buses for schools. They lease them, or they actually have a contractor company. So we don't actually store them day to day. So if we were to buy them, we would actually need a yard to put them in. And so space is a premium, as you know, in Brookline. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. With the bleed back effect, if you can power things off the grid for peak demand, would be an excellent sort of resource for us to recoup some of those costs and maybe consider, you know, building a yard for them. I've actually considered trying to work with Mpge and their yard in Jamaica Plain and try to sort of cut some sort of deal internally between different state agencies and the town. So all those things are in play. Everything is happening. And just really quickly, I live in Amesbury, Massachusetts, which was Carriage Town. So we actually manufactured horse-drawn carriages here. And around 1890 something, somebody got the bright idea to put an electric battery in a carriage and start the first electric vehicle, which was the Bailey Electric. And we still have some here in town that actually still run. And Thomas Edison actually brought it back to Menlo Park, and you could get an Edison battery upgrade on that particular car. And it was marketed as being a cleaner alternative to the horse or to the electric or to the gasoline vehicle at the time, which took a lot of cranking and lubricating to get the thing running. So there was actually a showroom on Newbury Street, and it was doing really well until the Model T hit. And once Ford got rolling, that was sort of the end of that, and it went by the wayside.
Yeah. I'm going to make a comment about the electric school buses because Anna mentioned this program up in Beverly, which is really interesting. The company that's doing it is based in Beverly. And essentially what they're doing is offering a service to schools, or in that case, a whole school department, where for a fee that's not insubstantial, but works out economically very well, that company supplies the electric school buses. It has the yard, it's doing the charging, it's then sending electricity back into the grid and crediting the customer in that case, which is the school department. And that company is going great guns. They just signed a contract to do that service for 300 buses for a county in Virginia.
Wow.
And I think that model of fleet services coming from a single source like that may go a long way, but we'll see.
I like it.
I've got one quick comment. For the folks in here that actually don't own a fully electric car and are afraid of it, or more so taking this course to learn more and understand where the future is heading with vehicles, even taking the step of an electric hybrid makes all the difference too. The electric hybrids alone, not just for my brand, I'm just cars in general, you can get upwards of that 20 to 25 mile range on purely electric. You can force the car to drive in purely electric mode and not use any gas. So that's always an option as well. So I know Anna touched on range anxiety. It is definitely a big fear. You see people come in all the time in the dealership mentioning like what happens when I'm getting low on range. So for those folks, if you are one that suffers from that, I mean, an electric hybrid is a good step in the door and a good step in the right direction of electric vehicles to still get the full experience of the quiet drive, the lower cost and need for repairs in certain areas, and still not have to fully commit. But it's still a nice step in the right direction.
Well, with that, I think I'm going to say thank you one more time, and then let's cut for tonight, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ralph and Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week, same time, same link.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.